Hello, brothers and sisters. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. It's wonderful to once again be back with you here on Points of Light Radio. And this particular segment of Points of Light Radio is something I'm really looking forward to bringing you, because I'll be bringing you an interview that I did last month with a gentleman named Robert Cooper. Okay, now Mr. Cooper is a Masonic historian and author. He's also the former curator of the Masonic Grand Lodge of Scotland. He's written, like I said, he's an author, done a number of books, and a number of them were on not just Freemasonry, but various other fraternal organizations. One of them being the Order of Free Gardeners, which he's here to talk about today. Now, if you recall, on my May 1st segment of Points of Light Radio, I interviewed a gentleman named Giovanni Grippo, or as I like to call him, Herr Grippo, from Germany. We had quite a lengthy conversation of the Order of Free Gardeners in that segment. I encourage you to go back and have a look at that, because it will really line up quite well with the particular segment we're doing today. But let's just recap. The Order of Free Gardeners is a fraternal society that was founded in Scotland in the middle of the 17th century and later spread to England and Ireland. The oldest evidence of the existence of the Order of Free Gardeners are some recorded minutes from the Haddington Lodge, which opened on the 16th of August, 1676. And it's quite possible that their history goes even back further than 1676. Now, although the Order of Free Gardeners have always remained independent of Freemasonry, and you're going to hear my guest talk about this today, the history of the organization and organization of the two orders show numerous similarities. Some prime examples that I'll just give you right now are that both the Freemasonry and Free Gardenery have 3 degrees. The emblem of the Order of Free Gardeners is the square and compass with a pruning knife, where Freemasonry has, if you recall, the square and compass with the G in the middle. Now, the Order of Free Gardeners almost completely died out, at least in the United Kingdom and many other parts of the world, but have seen a bit of a revival in recent times. And many of the records were brought back to Scotland, where it used to be headquartered, in the last number of years. Now, from my research, I find that the Free Gardeners have lodges in the United Kingdom, Germany, parts of Africa, and Australia. There are also 2 or 3 in the United States, but none in Canada. And I will also mention this, as you've heard me mention before, that like many other fraternal organizations, Free Gardeners are growing within the Philippines. And my guest will expand on that. Now, as I've often said, the Free Gardeners are a fairly obscure and little-known organization. But my guest today is quite knowledgeable. He's a Free Gardener himself, and he belongs to a number of other fraternal organizations, which I'm going to make him promise to come back and discuss. But it's an absolute honor to feature Mr. Cooper here on Points of Light Radio today. And many of my segments I edit. I do a fair bit of editing. This one, I just let Mr. Cooper speak. And this is going to be interesting once you start watching it. So I can't wait to get started. So let's go to this interview. But as always, I want to ask you, are you still searching for the light? Are you still hungry for knowledge, then why don't you just trim your lamp and follow me after this.
Ladies and gentlemen, seekers of light and secret knowledge wherever you may be, you are listening to Points of Light Radio, the podcast dedicated to taking you past the apron and behind the closed doors of lodges everywhere. And here is your host, Stan Miller.
Well, Mr. Cooper, welcome to Points of Light Radio.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me.
And you're here today to talk about the Free Gardeners. But first, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, gosh. Where to start? Well, I've been the curator of the Grand Lodge of Scotland for almost 30 years, but I've just recently retired. So just learning how to live with myself now instead of working. And that's been a little bit of an interesting adjustment, but I've got all sorts of projects on the go, one of which is to update the book on the Free Gardeners. The original book is, it's over 20 years old now, and we've learned a lot in that time. So it's time to update that, and that'll be early next year. So apart from all that, just try to keep busy. And of course, as we were talking about, Free Gardeners is very much a subject that is very interesting to me. So that's why I was delighted to accept your invitation.
Well, now, are you a member of the Free Gardeners?
Yes. Free Gardeners revived about 15 years ago. The interesting thing about it is that it's grown organically. That is, that there is no Grand Lodge, and I think that is perhaps a reflection of the Masonic experience of having Grand Lodges. The guys who revived the order decided that they really didn't want a kind of head office, because if nothing else, it adds a substantial layer of bureaucracy to the way of doing things. So the Free Gardeners lodges that exist, and there are a few. There are a few in the UK. There's a couple in the United States, one in Switzerland, one in Germany, dotted here and there. So they appear, but that's all down to existing members forming lodges in different places. So there is no procedure to be followed to form a lodge as such. So that's hence it's organic rather than structured.
Well, but there again, though, didn't they recently move I thought they moved the Grand Lodge from Africa back to Scotland or something like that happened.
Yeah, it wasn't really a Grand Lodge. What happened was all the records of a Grand Lodge had been sent to South Africa, because that's where the last Scottish lodges were. But we completely lost track of them in South Africa. So you're right in the sense that on paper there was a Grand Lodge in South Africa, but that was the previous organization, if you like. The new one, the organic one, as I call it, doesn't have a Grand Lodge.
Okay, now you did mention that it pretty much disappeared until the last, you said, 15 years or so. How would you explain this reemergence, though? What would have led to that? What would have precipitated that?
Well, I think it's historical and cultural. And what I've been looking at, and this is one of the reasons that I'm having to rewrite the book, Scotland and England, as you know, they exist on the same island, but they are two different countries, two different cultures, two different sets of history, although there is interaction between the two. And what I find fascinating was that in Scotland, fraternities or societies or organizations, call them what you will, often sprung from the daily working life of ordinary people. So Freemasons sprang from lodges of stonemasons. Free gardeners arose from lodges of working gardeners. And the same goes from for the other organizations like free colliers, free fishermen, free horsemen, etc., etc. And there are many, and that's just a half a dozen off the top of my head. So these are based very much on people's actual daily working lives. Whereas in England, which is a substantially richer country in terms of finance, and certainly in terms of the size of population, it's much larger. Many of these fraternities or societies were inventions. That is, they came out of the minds of gentlemen who had leisure or leisure time. And so they invented organizations like the Oddfellows or the Buffaloes or the Foresters. So they were pure inventions. So here you have two countries on the same island. One is using the actual occupation of the population to create societies, whereas the other country, England, is using the imagination to create societies or fraternities. And that I thought was a very interesting comparison. And so free gardeners, as we know, definitely springs from the daily lives of gardeners who were professional working gardeners, planting, designing, pruning, growing, doing all the things that gardeners do. Yeah.
But what would explain though the reemergence of them?
Well,
Just the desire to reconnect or something?
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of investigation going on at the time about how in Scotland you had lodges of stonemasons, the earliest ones of which who got written records from 1599. And initially, these lodges of stonemasons could comprise of nothing but working stonemasons. But as we look through the actual records, their written records of their meetings, after a few years, they slowly but surely start to admit people who are not stonemasons. So people like me and you would join a stonemason's lodge, but we couldn't change the structure or the ceremonies or whatever. You were joining something that actually pre-existed your membership.
Yeah.
The same thing. So we were thinking, well, what about other organizations such as the Free Gardeners? And it was, wow, that's exactly the same experience. You had Free Gardeners lodges that were, the members were nothing but actual working gardeners. There was no one else. You had to be a professional gardener in order to join these lodges. But looking at their records, and their records exist not much later than the Freemasons' records from the 1650s. The same phenomenon happens. You have lodges where there are just working gardeners as members, but slowly but surely they begin to admit people like you and I. And so the parallels between stonemasonry and gardenery are very similar. And of course, this is at a time where no Grand Lodges exist. There's no Grand Lodge of Freemasons, there's no Grand Lodge of Gardeners. And so it was a parallel development of completely different organizations. The ritual, the ceremonial are based on completely different stories, but the similarities in terms of their actual development were quite startling, frankly. And the thing is that this only happened in Scotland. And that was the attraction. So, well, if it could work for Freemasonry or stonemasonry to Freemasonry, a lot of the guys said, well, why can't we do the same with free gardenery, or gardenery to free gardenery? And so they decided they wanted some free gardeners' lodges. And I have to say quite a lot, well, nearly all of them were formed by Freemasons, because they found the ceremonial, particularly the esoteric content of the ritual, to be fascinating. And so you quite often now will find that Freemasons and free gardeners operate together, if you like, although completely separate, because the ritual makes them completely separate, but the membership tends to be very similar.
Well, I was going to ask you about that as well. How do you explain that Freemasons do that? Because I featured the Knights of Pythias, for instance, on this. Mm-hmm. And that was started by a Freemason, Rathbone, I believe his name was Justice Rathbone. How do you explain that Freemasons going around and starting other organizations?
Well, I suspect there's all sorts of different reasons. There are people who have a love of ceremonial, a love of ritual, the theatrics of it all. So this is another dimension. It is another way of doing something similar, but it's different, because the ritual is different. So there's an attraction from that. So if you enjoy Freemasonry, you would certainly enjoy being a free gardener. The same as you would enjoy being a free collier, or a free fisherman or whatever. The attraction is the same. The difference is, of course, that today, in today's day and age, Freemasonry is preeminent. All these other organizations have virtually disappeared. So there is no alternative, really. If you enjoy that kind of stuff, there's really only one place to go, certainly in the United Kingdom, and that is basically to become a Freemason. There are other smaller organizations, and some very but in terms of size and publicity, Freemasonry is head and shoulders above everything else that exists. So whereas at one time, and we've got to remember this also, particularly in the 19th century, being the member of a so-called secret society was very common. In fact, it was quite unusual for you not to be a member of one of these organizations. And what's happened, of course, is when these organizations like the Free Gardeners and what have you disappeared, it left Freemasonry as the only example of something that used to be extremely common. And so it attracts attention for all the wrong reasons, actually, as if Freemasonry is the only secret society that ever existed. There were many, many, 100, 200 years ago. And so, it would not be unusual. And so that's part of the attraction. I think people are rediscovering this other kind of organization that has as much to offer as Freemasonry does.
And I will say that to what you said there, because I talked to a gentleman here in Canada who was an Orangeman, and he was also a Freemason. And he said what he loved about Freemasonry is, he said, it doesn't matter where he goes in this country. He can always attend a Freemason meeting or a Freemasonry sponsored event. He said, you can't say that for a lot of the other organizations. You just can't.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's, and in some ways, that's what sustains Freemasonry. Whereas free gardenery, it's simply not possible for me as a free gardener to go to Toronto and attend a free gardener's lodge.
No,
because
there is
there
no
isn't.
free gardeners lodges in this country.
No.
We'll see if we can't change that. But back to the free gardeners, what exactly do they do? Are they similar to the Freemason for their activities and organizing charitable things and things like that?
They used to be, and this again is part of the history, which was a very interesting but different situation to Freemasonry. What happened to most of these organizations, including the Free Gardeners, during the Victorian period in particular and earlier, there was no kind of social welfare provision by government. So it was left to individuals to provide for themselves unemployment benefits, burial, funeral costs, all that kind of thing had to be devised or arranged by the individual, or more often by local societies. Things like the Free Gardeners began to focus more and more on the social insurance side of things.
Oh.
And what happened was that during the Victorian era, as these kind of social welfare organizations grew and lots of money became involved, government started to legislate to make the thing became a bureaucracy. And so eventually, the Free Gardeners is a classic example. The ritual became less important. The most important part of the Free Gardeners and the others was the insurance or the friendly society side of things. And so, sad to say, the ritual or the ceremonial became less and less important, and so you became a Free Gardener very quickly in a matter of minutes, and then you could join the friendly society or the insurance side of things, and that's simply what happened. Then, of course, in the UK. After World War II, the government decided that social welfare would be provided by the state. And overnight, essentially, every citizen, or certainly at that time, every man, every employed person had to become part of the social welfare system that became law. I think it was in 1947. So people couldn't afford to pay the government and the friendly society or the insurance company. So overnight, the reason for the likes of the Free Gardeners to exist disappeared. So from a financial point of view, the good as it was, the social welfare provided by the state killed off all these little friendly societies like the Free The Freemasons, the Freemasons were the exception. During the Victorian era, the powers that be at the time said, look, no, Freemasonry is not about providing social welfare benefits. It's about initiation and ceremonial. And so they forbade insurance or friendly societies. And so Freemasonry survived simply because they took that decision not to provide the same kind of financial benefits that the Free Gardeners were providing. And so by accident almost, Freemasonry survived, whereas Free Gardenery did not.
Okay, now let's talk about the similarities between you're a Freemason, you're also a Free Gardener. Let's talk about the similarities between the two. Would you say they're similar in, shall we say, the way they structure their meetings?
Yeah. And again, that's partly historical, because when Free Gardenery, the Friendly Society arm of Free Gardenery, died off in the 1950s because of the state welfare system, a lot of Free Gardeners became members of the Freemasons. And so there was a kind of cross fertilization, if you like. And so there were lots of similarities. The difference is that the ritual is a completely different basis. So you've got an apprentice gardener, a journeyman gardener, and a master gardener. So it has 3 degrees.
Okay.
Same as Freemasonry, but the basis of the ceremonial is quite different from Freemasonry. So although the structure is similar, the office bearers are similar, even the symbolism has a certain similarity.
Yeah.
The actual ritual is different. The basis of the ritual, the basis of the ceremonial is different, but it's not so different that a Freemason wouldn't find it comfortable to be a free gardener as well as a Freemason, because there are distinct similarities. But for the same reason, the Grand Lodge, a Masonic Grand Lodge, could never admit free gardeners as being Masonic because the ritual is so radically different.
Well, I do understand that the free gardeners follow a very biblical narrative. It's based on your gardeners, the Garden of Eden, so on. This is how I've explained it. Whereas Freemasonry isn't entirely based around that.
Well, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of research being done just at the moment.
Oh.
And we're talking about, and I think we've got to think about pre-Grand Lodge.
Okay.
So we're talking about Scotland at a time where no Grand Lodges existed, and you have lodges of Freemason or stonemasons, I should say, and you've got lodges of gardeners, lodges of fishermen, etc., etc. So if you think about it in this way, what is the first stone building in the Bible?
Solomon's Temple.
Exactly. So the attraction to stonemasons' lodges, I mean, they could not ignore that fact that the first stone building in the world, as far as they were aware from the Bible,
at least the grand stone building, yeah.
Yeah. So basing their ritual on that was almost unavoidable. And before somebody says, but there was another building earlier than that in Genesis, the Tower of Babel, which is correct. But the difference with that is that was made from brick, right? Very specifically built from brick. It was not made from stone. And of course, stonemasons would have nothing to do with brick buildings. Working in stone was their forte. So you can imagine a stonemason sitting in church on Sunday, and the minister or pastor or whoever is regaling them with the first stone building in the world, as far as they know. And what's more, not only is it the first stone building, it's also a sacred building. So you can see the attraction is incredibly powerful to stonemasons. Now, put your free gardener's hat on and you're sitting in church listening to your priest, your minister, your pastor, and he's regaling you with the first garden, the Garden of Eden, the perfect garden, the first garden in the world, as far as they know. Well, how are they going to ignore that when it comes to creating their ceremonial? Well, they can't. They can't. I mean, it's in their DNA. Same goes for a shipwright. You know, the guys who made the first wooden ships. What's the first wooden ship in the Bible?
The Ark, wasn't it?
Yeah, Noah's Ark. Yeah. So, what do you think their ritual is based on? Okay,
yeah,
and so on, so on, so on. So they are using the Bible not for its religious content, which is why a lot of our detractors get it completely wrong. They're using the Bible, particularly the Old Testament, because of the wonderful stories it contains, not because of the religious dimension, but because it has a direct resonance with their actual trade of stonemasonry, gardenry, or whatever. And so that's why they take those stories and they develop a ceremonial from it.
And let's be blunt as well. When you talk about churches, religion and church played a huge role in people's lives back then. So they would be getting this from there. Yeah, I can see where they get that from.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, and I mean, I think that's got a lot of, that's a powerful argument as to the origin of a lot of this stuff. It's just that much later, of course, I mean, at one time, people had read the Bible from page 1 to the last page. Sadly, nowadays, I don't know that many people have ever done that. And so the assumption is that the story that the Freemasons are using is because it's some kind of religious dimension. That's simply not correct. And sadly, a lot of our members don't seem to realize that either, that King Solomon's Temple is not used in any kind of religious context at all. It's because it was made by stonemasons.
Yeah. But are the regalia, is the regalia the same between the two, by the way? Is it aprons, collars, the whole 9 yards?
Yeah, they have the same regalia as such, but the symbolism is quite different.
Oh, okay.
I mean, I did have a PowerPoint presentation. So can I share the screen with you just very quickly? All right, no, I can't. I do have a PowerPoint presentation that shows you a lot of this kind of stuff, and you would see they're not dissimilar, but the symbolism is significantly different. And we know, for example, we know where the first lodge met. The building still stands. It's not too far away from here, actually, 20 miles east of Edinburgh. The building still stands. The lodge room still exists. And the same goes for other buildings across Scotland, certainly. Free gardeners' lodges, matched in terms of numbers and in terms of membership, were on a par with Freemasonry. The organization was as big as Freemasonry at one time. So there's lots of residual information, regalia, buildings, jewels, certificates, all that kind of stuff, all kind of sloshing around. But unfortunately, there is no kind of one museum of free gardenery. So all this stuff is just kind of scattered across the country.
You're going to try to change that?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Grand Lodge of Scotland has over the years collected, more by accident than design, has collected quite a lot of this free gardener stuff. And it's interesting to see in parallel with Freemasonry how it begins in a fairly kind of rudimentary form, and as money becomes more available, things become more refined. So instead of hand-painted aprons, you start to get embroidered aprons, and you then start to get gold jewels, things that cost money. And that's where the similarities between Freemasonry and free gardenery start to come together. But they are, I mean, anyone who doesn't know the difference, when they look at a free gardener's jewel, say, or an apron, they will make the assumption that it is Masonic, because it looks similar, but it isn't the same. But yeah, so.
But now you talk about the differences in the organic nature of it. I understand in Europe, they allow women into some of the free gardeners' lodges. Do they do that in the UK?
That depends on the lodge.
Okay.
Yeah. And this is perhaps the beauty of reviving an order. You can revive it according to or shape it according to what you want it to be. Historically, free gardeners were never had women in them because it was a male-only occupation. Times have changed, advanced 300, 400 years. The situation is no longer that male exclusive. So I can see the attraction of making it open to male and female. But having said that, there are some guys who say, no, we prefer to have things the way they always were. And when they form a free gardeners lodge, it will be male only. But that's their choice. I know that in one place they have a male only, and they have a male and female lodge that meets in the same building. So,
hey man, whatever floats your boat, eh?
Sure, yeah, exactly.
Well, let's talk about your books now. Let's talk about, you mentioned you wrote some books. How many books have you written?
I've written or edited 14 in total. Some are out of print, sadly. The Free Gardeners book is out of print, for example. But so it's quite a few. I haven't done anything in terms of a book very recently, although I'm being very encouraged to do something about that. But in terms of, very quickly, the Roslin hoax, cracking the Freemasons code, the genealogy of the St. Clairs of Roslin, the Masonic magician, the Red Triangle. These are all books that are substantial books, which took considerable time to write. And I don't have any particular focus. The Red Triangle, for example, focuses on Freemasonry and the Holocaust, which is quite different from a book about Roslin Chapel and the Knight Templars and all that kind of stuff. So although I am particularly interested in the original rituals, Masonic and Gardner rituals, I've never actually written a book about that. Uh-huh. So perhaps you've already planted a seed in my, and you'll notice all the gardenery analogies that come out of this. You're planting a seed in my mind. Yeah. So free gardening is a lot of fun, and again, one of the attractions of free gardening, I'm kind of drifting off the subject, I know, but one of the attractions of free gardening, unlike Freemasonry, very few Freemasons have any practical experience of working in stone, of building anything. Yeah. Lots and lots of people have got practical experience of working in the garden.
Okay,
and so people get free gardenery a lot more than they get Freemasonry, because what gardenery is teaching, you're actually applying in your garden when you're trying to perfect, or hopefully trying to perfect your garden. So so not only do you get the kind of esoteric ceremonials thing, but then when it's nice weather, you rush out to the actual garden and you do the gardenery, So it has that attraction. Sorry, that was a digression that just.
Well, as someone once said to me too, it fits really good today with everybody with this green agenda that a lot of people have. Free gardening, it looks good to a lot of environmentalists.
Absolutely, especially when there is a strong moral, ethical element to this, as to how you're supposed to behave. And of course, you're actually applying it to the physical world in your garden. So there is for me, I can definitely relate to free gardenery more than I can to a stone building, which I have got no idea how to build, but I know what to do with weeds and flowers and things like that. So,
Well, what is the membership in Freemasonry and fraternalism and free gardeners? What has that done for you?
Well, for me, and this comes back to books, and this is perhaps where you become famous or perhaps infamous when you write, because as soon as you write a book, you put your head above the parapet and people can start taking pot shots at you, either because they don't agree with you or because they don't like the Freemasons or whatever. And that's been an interesting experience of traveling the world, where people know me through my books, and all I'm trying to do is in some ways is give a kind of educational take on what these organizations are about. Hence, my very strong opinion that there is no religious element in Freemasonry, because it's not based on the religious dimension. So for me, what's happened is that as I travel around the world, I hope I'm trying to explain to people that they should not be concerned about things like Freemasonry, because there is no conspiracy as such. The same as, put it this way, if people were aware that there are free gardeners, free fishermen, free colliers, are they going to start blaming all these organizations for the New World Order as well as Freemasons? Because they are all essentially the same, just have got a different ceremonial. So you see what I mean? Yeah. This is the problem of Freemasonry being by far and away the biggest and the most well-known so-called secret society. And of course, this is the use and abuse of the word secret. If we were a secret society, nobody would know about us.
Yeah, exactly.
So even trying to educate people into the use of the English language is a problem for me, because secret means unknown or unknowable. But they gaily go around saying, "Oh, you're a member of a secret society." Yeah, how do you know that?
Yeah, exactly. But fraternalism, you say, has, in free gardening, that's really been, it's done a lot for you.
Yes, certainly in terms of my understanding of ordinary working people of 200-300 years ago, I now understand better the way they thought, and in many ways they weren't so different from us. Obviously they had different experiences and different expectations in life, but they all had the same emotions. They all loved their relatives. They all had their own beliefs. They all had their own struggles with money, all that kind of stuff. So human beings down the centuries are pretty much the same. But when you get into the kind of the nitty-gritty, if you like, of their daily lives, you begin to understand them. I think I do anyway. I begin to understand them more because of I now understand what they were doing for a living, whereas I'd never, could never have thought about that.
Yeah. Well, what are your plans for retirement?
Well, to be honest, I'm supposed to be trying to catch up on all sorts of commitments that I've made over the years since 2019, and of course, COVID cancelled a lot of things. In fact, just 4 weeks ago, I was supposed to be in Toronto to give a presentation to the Grand Lodge of Canada in the province of Ontario, but that flight was cancelled, so I didn't get to go there. I was supposed to be in Texas earlier this year, and that flight was cancelled. But I'm in New Jersey in 2 weeks' time, provided they don't cancel the flight.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm trying to catch up on all of that. I had lots of commitments in England and some in Scotland. And then, of course, we had a series of railway strikes.
Yeah.
So I ended up having to drive around Britain, trying to catch up on all these postponed events. So I've been doing quite a lot of that. And that usually means giving a PowerPoint presentation, because I like to illustrate things as much as I can. People get a better understanding, I think, of not just listening to words, but seeing what I'm trying to describe. So
you might do some books too, right?
Yeah, oddly enough, I don't. I mean, somebody said, "Why don't you take around books with you and sell them at these?" But books are heavy, you know. So,
but in retirement, you might want to do some more writing too. This is the thing. I think.
Well, that's true, and there are several projects that I really should get moving on. Nobody's around forever. And there are a variety of what I consider to be very important subjects that haven't been written about, that should be written about. But it's a strange thing, you know. I mean, I've worked since I was 14 years old, so now not working is a very huge adjustment.
Oh.
Yeah, because, you know, up at 6 o'clock in the morning, every morning, getting to the office just after 7 o'clock, working there till 4 or 5 in the afternoon.
Yep.
And now the alarm goes off at 6 o'clock, and I say, I don't actually have to get up now. I don't actually have to get up. And so there is a huge adjustment in terms of working, you know. I don't have to work now. I'm retired. But that in itself is very dangerous, because you end up potentially becoming quite lazy.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
and not doing anything. And I'm conscious of that. But it's
going to spend more time at the Lodgeville, maybe, or
yeah, of course. At this time of year, they're only now. No, they're still closed in the main. There's a few lodges open in the summer, but most lodges in Scotland are closed June, July, and August. People are going on vacation, and there's just not enough people around. So it won't be until next month that they start to reopen. So summer's always a difficult time to become involved in Freemasonry here. Although there are a few lodges where, particularly in places like Edinburgh, where they will open because they know there's going to be a lot of tourists around.
Yeah.
And so people from all over the world want to come to Edinburgh because of the international festival. So some of the lodges do open in summer for that reason. So there is Masonic activity. Mm-hmm. And when you think, I mean, Scotland has a population of just over 5 million, but in Scotland there are 660 lodges.
Wow.
So there is a lot of Masonic activity, and that's just craft lodges. That doesn't include all the other branches of Freemasonry. So it is possible here in Edinburgh, which has a population of 500,000. It's possible to attend 9 meetings a week here.
Wow.
If you work it out correctly. So no meetings on Sunday. So you've got six evenings, and then it's possible to attend a lodge on a Saturday morning, and a Saturday afternoon, and a Saturday night. So it's possible to attend nine lodge meetings in a week here.
How would you explain, like, for instance, that Free Gardeners and a lot of other, to be fair, like the Eagles and the Pythians, it's growing huge in the Philippines?
Yeah, I get the sense that established religions are losing their attraction.
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is interesting.
Yeah, so and I think it's mainly driven by younger people.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah, they're no longer interested in doing exactly what their mum and dad and granddad and great granddad did Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, which after all is pretty much the same Sunday after Sunday after Sunday, and they're looking for something different.
Yeah.
And so, you can go to a Masonic lodge today, a Free Gardeners lodge tomorrow, a Free Colliers lodge the next day.
Yeah.
And so you're getting a huge variety of esoteric fraternal experiences. Whereas if you're a member of one church, that's it. That's the only deal in town, isn't it?
Running out of time here again. So I'm going to let you go.
Okay.
I appreciate your time today, Mr. Cooper, and all the best to you and your lodges there.
All right. Same to you. Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. Robert Cooper, brothers and sisters. There you have it. There you have it. Masonic author, historian, Free Gardener, as well as several other organizations he belongs to. And I don't know about you, but I feel like we've just made a friend here. And you feel like I felt like I always knew the guy. I really did. And I think that's wonderful. And I will also say that wasn't just an interview. That was a conversation. That's how I like my segments of Points of Light Radio to progress. When I hear some of my potential guests say, well, I don't think I'd make a good interview, I'm not asking you to. Let me walk you through it. None of my guests should feel inhibited or in any way intimidated by coming on here and speaking with us here on Points of Light Radio, right? But I loved how he discussed not only the Free Gardeners, but a number of other organizations. And I will, just to give you the heads up, cherry-picked, I did edit out a small section where he talks about another organization he belongs to called the Hammermen, right? I'm saving that for later because I do want to do a segment that deals with that. I will bring that to you just to give you the heads up, like I said, later on sometime later on. But it was an interesting one there, and I will have him back to discuss not just the Hammermen, but a number of other organizations that he belongs to. I will, hopefully I can get him to come back on here, right? But I know I learned a lot here, and I'm sure you have. I do love this organization. I have to admit, there is something about the Order of Free Gardeners. I think it's one of the reasons, having studied the Bible down through the years, I think, as I said, when I discussed the order, when I interviewed a gentleman on the Order of the Secret Monitor, if you recall in my closing remarks, I talked about how I understand where they get the allegories from, right? And looking at the Order of Free Gardeners, I can understand why they got these stories out of the Bible. The Garden of Eden was a perfect garden. It was where God wanted people to live, right? If you read the book of Genesis, you'll see it in there. First couple, 2 or 3 chapters of Genesis, right? Solomon had a beautiful garden. I can understand why they picked that out. And of course, let's never forget the role that gardens have played, like I said, all down through gardening and things like that have played all down through biblical history. Prime example was that Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray and prepare himself for his arrest, interrogation, and crucifixion, right? And of course, if you read the Bible, there's a beautiful garden waiting for people in heaven as well, right? You know, and to fully comprehend that, you really have to go into the Bible and read those stories. You really do get a sense of that. But I do love as well. I had no idea that the free gardeners were so organic in nature, as Mr. Cooper discusses there, that there is no Grand Lodge. There is no, I didn't know that, there's no Grand Lodge, right? And so being organic, they can set their lodges up any way they want. I kind of like that, right? But their numbers have rebounded, right? In recent years, they were on the decline, but it's good to hear this. We need to preserve, I keep reminding you, we need to preserve the history of these organizations. But I'm afraid that's all I have time for today, brothers and sisters. But before I go, as usual, I want to remind you that this podcast is available on both YouTube and Spreaker. Please share, like, and subscribe when viewing Points of Light Radio on YouTube. You can follow Points of Light Radio on my Facebook page at facebook.com/Points of Light Radio. You can see my Twitter handle, which is at PO Light Radio. You can see the link to my Spotify channel, as well as my Points of Light Radio store in the details section. I also want to point out that Points of Light Radio is available to advertise your fraternal store or event. Simply get in touch with me via my Facebook page. But until next time, brothers and sisters, it's been a pleasure fellowshipping with you. But until next time, until we meet again, just step into the light.